definition, look, in its basis terms, it's somebody trying to sell you something, right? Like that's the end game here. If it's a soft sell or a hard sell, it's something with a call to action, and you as a consumer are supposed to respond. But the way I process it these days is that when you look at Gen Z in particular, like they don't by and large, they've created sort of an ecosystem for themselves where traditional advertising doesn't really get the opportunity to seep into their heads.
Hi, my name is Adam Freeman. This is Comic Industry Insiders, a weekly podcast where we talk to the smartest people we can find in comics, the people behind the scenes, the people who make things happen. And we try and get to know them and their career and try and tease out the things that will make your business or career in comics that much stronger. My guest this week is Kris Longo. Kris is a publicist and marketing professional who has built a reputation in the comic book industry, particularly in the realm of licensing and marketing. He's the founder of Geek Riot Media. I believe it's now known as Modern Fanatic, and you can see the logo on the hat. Nice placement. A marketing and brand development agency that focuses on connecting pop culture brands with audiences. With extensive experience in the comics, publishing, and licensing industries, he's got his start at a small boutique publisher at, I think it's called DC Comics. I don't know. Never heard of it.
Yeah, you may not.
Kris has built a business and there you go. It's real indie. Kris has built a business and career while surfing the changing landscape of comics and entertainment, and has been really fun to watch from the outside. Plus, amazing hair. I mean, look at this guy with this mane. No, I'm not jealous. Shut up. Hey, Kris, how are you, man?
Good, man. Thanks for having me on. And thanks for the haircut.
Of course. I'm glad we were able to make the time work. Oh, dude. I'm not saying I have jealousy. I fully proud of my bald head, but believe me, there are days when I look at it and I think, oh, that guy gets all the chicks.
I'll tell you.
All right, let's start with something real important. Yeah.
The grass is always greener. I tell you, I've been thinking about shaving this thing off.
No doubt.
A couple weeks.
Let's start with something real important. What's your current boxing weight class, and what's your do you have like a record that you
Oh my gosh. Well, see, I more cosplay as a boxer. I'm not a boxer. I'm a guy who likes to box. If you put me in an actual ring with an actual competitor, it would be a disaster. But yeah, I love, I've fully embraced it as a stress reliever and a fitness plan. And as long as I can, my old body will continue to allow me to do that. That's a very important part of my life in the last few years.
I could definitely see that. I have to tell you, like, I look at boxers and the workouts and I think, God, that does look great. But the idea of getting hit in the head, man, there's enough head trauma in my life already, and that's just walking around, I totally feel that.
It's crazy.
Before we get there, there's a good chance we'll be able to get this episode out before the campaign ends. And so before we lose an audience to the algorithm, tell us quickly about the Zoot campaign you guys have running right now.
Sure. So among all the things that I do, apparently my boxing career notwithstanding, I found some time to create a publishing company and launch it this summer with some great partners called PANICK Entertainment. Panic for me is, I refer to it as a complete indulgence. It's not really a job for me. It's just something that brings me a lot of joy. To use the parlance of our election season, joy is a big word for me. But it's really scratching an itch I've had for a long time. I've been a horror fan as long as I've been a comic book fan. And I love the fact that we're having a little renaissance right now and more publishers are producing more horror comics. But I have certain sensibilities and things I like to see in horror storytelling. And it was just a put your money where your mouth is kind of moment for me after I left my last comic book gig. I had some ideas about some horror stories and some talented people I wanted to work with. and we just sort of put the Dirty Dozen together. Myself and Mark McCann and Adam Schlagman and Doug Pasco, Chris Chang, all these talented folks who bought into my mission and have joined me in this. We've been just barreling towards making the best possible content that we can very quietly over the last year. The Zoop project coming out of our San Diego Comic-Con formal announcement is really more than anything a way for us to kind of have a showcase for what we've been cooking all this time, because we are nothing if not impatient and so eager to share this stuff with the world. And the idea of announcing at San Diego Comic-Con and then doing nothing until March, April of 2025, when we plan to have books in comic shops, just seemed unheard of to me. So we embraced the crowdfunder as a way to create some fun exclusives for people who wanted to embrace this stuff a little bit earlier. But the books are essentially the guts of the book are going to be the same books that are in stores through proper channels through Diamond in 2025. But we've got a great little Zoop for people who like horror comics and like collectible formats. We're doing the first 3 issues of our first 3 books. They are Tama, Savager, and Black Diamond. And they are 3 very different flavors of horror, which I love. Tama is, if you like things like Megan and Chucky, Tama's kind of in that vein. It's sort of a cautionary tale about what happens when you let your virtual pets lie fallow and don't pay them any attention. And then they rise up and find a way to exact some revenge and make your life difficult and remind you that they're there. Savager is a really great, I know dystopian has been all the rage the last 10 years, but this is a really different take on that sort of a story. Kind of like Mad Max if he lived in an H.P. Lovecraft world. It's about these parasitic aliens who take humans as hosts. And the last sort of human with any sort of sentience who's struggling with that is sort of the main character and thrust throughout all this. So it's an action-y kind of horror tale, a lot of splatter, a lot of gore, stuff like that. And then Black Diamond is this great book from Brendan Columbus, who I worked with back at Heavy Metal. And Brendan sort of loosely pitched me this idea from a film script he wrote that he teed up as Hitchcock meets The Wicker Man. And when I read this, I read it in one sitting, which I almost never read anything in one sitting because I have a short attention span. But this thing really left a mark on me. If you're a parent, there's a lot of questions raised in this book about what would you do to protect your child? What lengths will you go to? And the story is really compelling. It's about a family on a ski vacation, and they are everybody's having a good time until the child gets kidnapped. The father gets a phone call and is offered the opportunity to swap out his child for another child, so the child is not sacrificed. And leads into this really interesting moral conundrum with some really great tension set pieces in there about the parents trying to figure out how to go about doing this. And it's just one of those things you can't help if you have kids or, you're an aunt or an uncle or something like that. You can't help but put yourself in the protagonist's shoes and figure out, what would I do? What would I say? How would I respond to this stuff? Would I respond in the same way? And it's just, all these books are just so off the chain, uncompromising. They're exactly what they need to be without any compromises, which is exactly what I wanted to do with this publishing company. So the Zoop is basically your taste of the first 3 titles, the first issues of the first 3 titles. We have them in a standard format with a really beautiful triptych cover from Shane Pierce, who's absolutely incredible painter. If you don't know his work, look him up. He is fantastic. He's worked on a number of different things over the years in comics. And we're offering in standard format, metal covers, CGC grading, both with and without trade dress. We have retailer bundles in there. We have digital only bundles in there. We've got a little bit of something for everybody. We got some cool enamel pins we're working on for all of the title treatments for the books. Just fun stuff that we knew people would respond to and like. And it's, we didn't position it as a big commitment. If you're a fan, like, we have a lot of tiers that are very affordable and easy to latch onto. And we're just really thrilled so far at the response that we've gotten. And we're live for another 19 days, I believe, at this point. We're gonna be wrapping up, 2.5 weeks. and we have a modest goal. We hope to get to it, but these books are happening, and the direct market versions we're aiming for April 2025.
Awesome. Amazing. What date does that close? Do you know off the top of your head?
Off the top of my head, I want to say it's the 13th of October.
Okay. Okay, great. We'll endeavor to get this out before then. We'll have to skip a couple people in line, I think, in order to do that. We'll do what we can. That's wonderful. I definitely want to talk some.
We may be inspired to let a few options linger after the close date, but we'll see. But the 13th right now is the wrap up.
That's very, very smart. I love that, and I love Zoop, man. We had Jordan on as a guest, and I think the world of them and what they're doing over there. They're great. Very smart. Do definitely want to talk some more about Panic a little bit later, but first I'd love to kind of go back, get back in the Wayback Machine and head back to. I mean, I'll be honest. There's not a whole lot about Kris Longo available, just on the internet before the DC gig. Can you give us a taste of how you get to that place, where you come from, who you are? Like, what's your dating profile look like?
Oh man, I've been married for too long. There's no dating profile. It's been a long time since I thought about that. So yeah, I mean, look, I couldn't, if you told me back in like 1997 that I wound up having a comic book career, it would have been completely foreign to me. I grew up, as a young kid, I was a voracious comic book reader. I was a huge fan of Amazing Spider-Man. That was my earliest, that and Spidey, if you remember that, based on the Electric Company version of Spider-Man, like a very kid-friendly Spider-Man. Those two books were my go-to. And I started picking them up. Even before really I had like a firm grasp on reading, I was interested in reading comics. So I would say like I'm one of those people who probably at the end of the day learned the fundamentals of reading from comic books. But I grew up loving that stuff. And then as one does, like you hit your teenage years and other things call for your attention and maybe you stray away from comics for a little bit. Mm-hmm. Then I had a little renaissance with them in college. But where I grew up in northern New Jersey, having a career in entertainment just seemed like something other people who live elsewhere get to do. Like this isn't something that I could ever make work for me. So I liked marketing. Sure. That was always something that was interesting to me. So I wound up taking a job at the recommendation of my college advisor at a marketing firm in New Jersey. And it was a small mom and pop operation, really fascinating cast of characters, family run business. Learned a lot because I was an intern, but they basically let me do anything and everything because they were so short staffed all the time. So I got to learn how to write press releases and write marketing decks and, make cold calls to TV newsrooms and things like that. So it was a really interesting education. And then a couple of years into that, I graduated to a larger pharmaceutical marketing agency where I spent a couple of years. And I did that thing where I was young and dumb enough to kind of examine my life and go, I don't want to do this. I'm about to commit to being this guy, this pharmaceutical marketing guy. And I really have no interest in pharmaceuticals and it's just not working for me. So I on the spot quit this job that was paying me decently because I was young, had no expenses or attachments. Yeah. And it was a wildly different economy back then. But I quit and I was like, I'm going to find something a little closer to my interests. So I wound up, and again, I'm saying so many things here that are dating me, but I found a job from Warner Brothers in the New York Times job listings. Okay. This is, we're going back to analog job shopping back in the day.
Classified ads.
Classified
My goodness.
ads.
Yeah.
Big Warner Brothers shield in the middle of that little ad. And it was they were looking for some lower level advertising representative. And I checked a lot of the boxes. So I applied for it via fax, I might add. And I got a response immediately, within an hour. Yeah. Got a response within an hour. The next day I was in Warner Brothers Human Resources Department, their corporate building on Avenue of the Americas. had an interview with a guy in a suit and tie, very stuffy, buttoned up human resources guy. The whole place was disappointingly sterile and corporate. It was all white walls and, black and white pictures and frames, and it looked like every office. And then this guy told me, he's like, all right, basically I passed his test. And he's like, now I'm going to send you across the street to meet the hiring manager at DC Comics and Mad Magazine. And I think I did that little like nerd gasp where I was like, really? But I tried to keep it under control. And I went across the street to 1700 Broadway and walked into the third floor. And I don't know if you ever got to visit the old 1700 Broadway DC offices, but they were something special.
A couple times. Yeah.
Yeah. So you come out of that elevator and suddenly you're in a Gotham City
amazing
rooftop.
lobby. Yeah.
Yep. So I was like, oh, this is home. So I have no memory of what I said in that interview with the hiring manager. But it must have worked because I got a bunch of callbacks to come back, and like 5 interviews in, they offered me the job. And it was great. I was there for 13 years, and I kind of grew from being like advertising department grunt to kind of owning a territory and working in collaboration with the sales force and working on projects that were basically like leveraging the company's creative capabilities for brands, for marketing collateral. So we would make comic books for like auto companies and pharmaceutical companies and movie studios to market their product. And we had a goal of trying to keep that creative as high quality as possible. Like we would use the same talent that worked on the core books at DC whenever possible. We would try not to farm it out to like art students and things like that. There were certain levels, bars we all wanted to meet to make that work good. And I think, in the time that I was there, I think we did some really interesting stuff there. Got us a lot of press, won us some marketing awards. And it really kind of put me on the path that I'm on today and was the inspiration for Modern Fanatic. Because I found that my job was largely going to these brand managers and marketing managers and evangelizing how important the comic format is and how precious it is and how there's a special relationship between the owner of a comic and the comic, and the comic itself, and how it's something that more often than not will never be discarded, even if it's something that's not near and dear to them. There's just this perception that you can't throw away a comic book. So it ends up being shared or gifted to somebody or something like that. And it was just a lot of evangelizing about how specifically unique and powerful that medium is and the special relationship it has to the readers. And got us a lot of business. It was a lot of fun. And then I kind of hit that point where it was like, I think I've done everything that I could possibly do here. I was repeating a lot of clients and renewing a lot of clients, and it was just becoming a very samey kind of a day in and out. So I left and I went and joined, another agency called Bonfire, which was kind of like the early version of Modern Fanatic. There would be no Modern Fanatic without Bonfire and Steve Rotterdam and Ed Cato, who you know. And that was incredibly challenging, but also really educational in a lot of different ways. From the point I left DC, I think I got tougher, stronger. I learned how to navigate a lot of different ups and downs and crises that you don't really get to do when you're corporately employed. And that led me to, founding all of these businesses that ultimately, half of them worked, half of them didn't. But, I think that's a pretty good batting average.
That's a really great batting average. I do want to hit on Bonfire, but before we leave DC, I do have a few questions about that period. And you did a great job of encapsulating a lot of what you were doing. So, I mean, we talk about industry-wide, we talk about what you were doing as custom comics, right? These are you're actually making comics for these brands. Can you talk just maybe a little bit more about what a big brand, you mentioned a few, what would they do with this comic that is never going to be thrown away? How does it get distributed? How do they get used? And also, like, when you also talked about keeping the quality high, maybe double tap on that a little bit. Like, are you are you essentially editorially? I mean, it's oftentimes difficult to get freelancers who want their work to be seen to work on a book like, that may never be seen because it's only going to go to Goodyear, tire outlets. So if you talk a little bit more about that, it'd be great.
Yeah, a really good example that kind of touches upon everything you just teed up there is the project that I did with Lego. So we had a publishing line that we created with them for their Bionicle property. Bionicle's sort of like this, if you're a Gundam fan, you kind of recognize Bionicle as maybe Lego's attempt to cash in on that side. But it really was its own distinct universe. And, it was the first time Lego was venturing into product that had lore and characters. And, it was really like their first true IP. And there was a gentleman on the brand team at Lego named Michael Pratt who recognized that comics would be an interesting overlay, and they would probably pay more dividends for them in terms of communicating to the buyer what's special about the property. Like they saw comics as an antidote to like the old instruction manual and things like that. It was a more dynamic way of teeing up the character relationships and the setting and how you use all these tools that the Bionicle characters came with and all of that. And Michael and I got connected, and then the DC and Lego teams collabed for about 6 months to create this. And the one thing that we always said on the custom side of things was sort of like the true north statement we always made was that if you remove the brand from the comic should still be a good read, which 90% of the time would work. Sometimes the product was so on the nose that it kind of infected the rest of the comic and you had to deal with that. But that was like the lowest benchmark of quality that we tried to hit, is like, if is this a story we would tell without the brand paying for it in some way? So to that end, we would always make sure if we were doing something for a Bionicle, that was one thing because we were using their property, their world. We were sort of just work for hire and using our skills to be able to create, all these extensions of a universe for them that could be leveraged in different ways. But if we're on the DC side of things where we're using the DC characters and settings, we always made it a point for a lot of reasons to not have the DC characters as pitch people. So there were usually like human avatar characters who did like the pitchier stuff in the service of the storytelling. And Superman or Batman or Wonder Woman would sort of be driving, sort of the flashier elements of the story and the thrust of the story. For example, we never had Superman hold up a Subway sandwich, go, hey, kids, buy one of these. Like, it was never that on the nose, and nor would Warner Brothers have allowed us to be that on the nose without some sort of ridiculous fee.
Yeah.
But that was the fun of it. Like I really enjoyed the challenge of working with the creative services team and figuring out, like, how do we make this work? And sometimes the challenges were so absurd that they became super fun. There's a gentleman named Marty Pasco, no longer with us, great comic writer, and he anchored DC's creative services department for the first few years that I was there. Marty became a good friend and a mentor, and I learned a lot about how to make comics from him. He was just a really amazing guy, a real character. And we had a meeting once with my team on the advertising side and his team on creative services with the folks who manage the Tang brand and the Kool-Aid brand. And they were interested in a collab comic where the Kool-Aid Man was teamed up with Jose Delgado, the gangbuster, because it was an initiative where they wanted to reach Hispanic Americans, like young Hispanic Americans, and that was the only character they could find that fit the bill. And somehow somebody in that structure over there fell in love with this concept. So poor Marty had to go write a treatment for this story where this living picture of Kool-Aid was running around with this man of the streets, rough and tumble character. And I got to tell you, somewhere in my files, I have a copy of that, and I'm going to rummage through them one day and find it. It is the funniest thing you will ever read. And I'm so disappointed.
I definitely want to read that.
But for all of those that we did a lot of really good work, I think, with a lot of different brands, like to make them, to answer your question about sort of the preciousness of them and upholding that. It was about storytelling, first and foremost, great artwork. But it was really about, on the Bionicle side, it was the one where, to this day, when I kind of reveal publicly that I had a hand in the Bionicle comics, as I'll often do on panels and things like that at conventions, invariably there will be somebody about 30 something years old hanging out at the end of that panel, waiting to tell me how much they love the Bionicle comics and that they still have them to this day.
Oh
Or
yeah.
worse yet, it's the classic "my mother threw them in the garbage" story, and I've never forgiven her, or whatever it is. But those really left a mark on people. So that was kind of the project to me that said, like, there's a career in this particular weird role that I'm sitting in, and I'm
You know,
still
it's
pitching
interesting.
these
Is
wild ideas to this
yeah.
day.
It's double tapping on that Bionicle thing. I have a 20-year-old who was obsessed with Bionicles, both the toys as a collection and the lore around them. And I realize now that, as you say that, I hadn't even connected the two things together. This was well before there were animated series.
Yeah.
And so they had done you had done an amazing job of giving him the lore of these toys, these plastic toys that you put together, and giving him that background and that narrative. So I think back on it. That is a true value of these custom comics. I hadn't actually considered that.
Yeah,
It's
I
really
mean, the team
wonderful.
at DC really put a lot of heart into them. They, I think in any other publishing company, they might have been seen as something you kind of phone in a little bit. But there was always considerable effort made. And I'm not speaking about myself. I'm the editors and everybody who touched these books, creatively speaking. Nobody wanted their name on something they didn't feel great about, and nobody wanted the DC mark on anything we didn't feel great about either. And I think more often than not, we delivered something that would still hold up, even if you're not a fan of the brand. There's still something in there to please DC fans or comic fans.
No doubt. All right, I do want to deal before we leave DC. You mentioned also advertising. Did you spend time in dealing with the advertising? Was that inbound or was it outbound? Like, what was your role?
Oh,
there?
my job was inbound. So I would go out and talk to these brands, and I would try and sell them first custom publishing, custom comics in like physical or digital format. Last couple of years I was there, we were really embracing the notion of the motion comic and stuff like that. And we got a lot of business doing that. But we would also try and sell in ad pages and all these things. So, by the end of my run there, we were selling extensions into DC's app and DC's website, and print, and the whole 9 yards. But I didn't really love just going out and selling white space in a book. I like going out and selling a creative hook. So I always tried to come in with like a baseline of a creative idea, something that they would think was interesting, and try to backdoor the advertising in that way. And more often than not, that worked.
Cool. All right. Well, I'm always curious. I know that there's a lot of curiosity in our field about how advertising in comics works and why advertising in comics in the actual display ads inside of the comic books themselves don't. And I've had these conversations that, it's basically those ads that are in there now are basically just an extension of the licensing agreements. Yeah. But, I've never really had a guest on who could speak to that other than myself. Right.
So there used to be a time where you'd go and meet with people who plan specifically print. There used to be like print departments within media agencies that you would go and meet with. And now that mostly does not exist. So comics were hit pretty hard by that. So DC, as far as I know, doesn't even maintain an advertising department anymore. I think it's just kind of all been absorbed into their general sales group and is more like catch as catch can than an actual priority. But I'm just speaking, observationally. I have no knowledge of that, but it seems like they've divested themselves of that. Yeah.
So then you moved on to Bonfire. You mentioned that with Steve Rotterdam and Ed Cato, and the two gentlemen that I have utmost respect for. In fact, I will tell you, I don't think I've ever revealed this on this show, but when it was announced that you guys were doing that, I think I sent Steve an email every day for a month saying, "Hey, what do you need? Can you hire me? What do you need?" And I look back on it, it's so cringy. I wouldn't hire me if I was doing that. I'd just be annoyed. Anyway, so tell me about the work you guys were doing at Bonfire.
It was tough. We were really Steve had created Bonfire and left DC the year before, so he and Ed had been like slugging it out on their own. When I joined, they had just sort of set themselves up with another agency as an incubator. Um, and we were doing, when I joined, I remember the first hour I was with Bonfire, we had a phone call with the guys from iVerse. So Michael Murphy and Tony Hobdy and all those guys who are still friends of mine today. They were, I think, Bonfire's first true client. They had done some work for the CBLDF, and we're trying to branch outside of comics, but keeping one foot in that world. And I'll tell you, it was an interesting education for me because I had gone from like this, startup with a huge company like Warner Brothers to this little 3-person operation, in a shed inside another marketing agency. Again, it was a real sort of it steals you to make an abrupt change like that and have to deal with all these new challenges that, by my estimation, were like so low to the ground. Like it just became a job that was about survival. And on one hand, it was really thrilling because I had to throw out my rule book and I had to start from scratch. And I had to do that thing where it was like, if I don't work for DC, is anybody still going to return my calls? Like all these clients that I have. And my clients were pretty good to me, all things considered. And most of them were happy to have meetings with me and hear our pitch and all of that. But, it was an idea that I think even if you ask Steve and Ed this, it was an idea probably a few years before its time. And I think collectively, if we were all to go back in time, we probably would not have incubated with that particular company. I think that held us back in a lot of ways. But I think at the end of the day, we're all kind of proud of what we did at Bonfire. I know there was, we bled over that concept and trying to broaden out that mission to the world. And it was just, in retrospect, it was just not the right time. And what's really exciting about it is now that I'm with Modern Fanatic and we're kind of carrying some of that water that Bonfire had established. I'd asked Steve to join our board, and he happily accepted. So Steve is kind of back in the fold with us as an advisor. I get to ping him and text him when we're having challenges, and he's always happy to help. And he said to me a couple times, like he's happy that if Bonfire didn't work, that the mission is still alive to some extent. So it's gratifying to see it working now, even if it didn't work out the way we all hoped back then.
Well, I can tell you, I love Steve. He was, when he was working at DC, he always had time for me, even though I was like not low end retailer, mid tier retailer. And he and then later on, honestly, he gave me a gig when I really needed, when Prana was just kind of getting started. He kind of got us rolling. So he really is a fantastic man. I love that guy. Hopefully,
Agreed.
Steve, hopefully you'll be on the show. It'll be wonderful. You talked about how it was a little bit before its time. One of the things that I know that you guys were working on was this idea of putting screens inside of shops, so inside of comic shops, for display ads and content. Do you think is that the thing? Is that idea just DOA, or was it just in the wrong time? Do you think that the way things have shifted, like I have this current theory that since there is no Diamond anymore. There is a Diamond. They're still out there. Diamond Comics is still there. Didn't mean it that way. But since Diamond is what it is, and Lunar's what it is, Penguin Random House what it is, there's no one really who is the direct conduit to shops. And I wonder if there's not more of a place for something that is, for some organization or business like yours or mine, right, that can kind of be that conduit. So I'm curious to know about what you guys found and if you think that's more viable now or less.
It's funny. I hadn't thought about that project in a really long time. So you just sort of pulled the plug on a whole bunch of memories now. But yeah, that was a really interesting idea. I think the challenge with that idea, and at the end of the day, it might be a perception challenge, it might be a reality challenge, but I think the challenge is that we needed investment to do that right, and we needed more human resources to be able to do that right because it required scale. It's not something that would really work the way we had intended it to work if only, say, 10 to 25 shops embraced it. We would need a sales force that would get that into shops, at a minimum of maybe like 300 to make it viable.
Sure.
And when we did the math on the advertising revenue yield for doing something like that, it seemed pretty robust to us based on the cost of execution. But it became apparent to us when you go and talk to investors about this that making $10 to $20 million is not enough. If somebody's going to invest in something, they need to see in 5 years that you're going to make them filthy rich, not just, acceptably rich. So almost consistently, the feedback that we got was like, well, maybe this particular marketplace is not dynamic enough to sustain this concept. And then I remember one person we talked to was advising us to, great idea, apply it to a whole different, retail community, something that's a little bit more robust. And again, the comic shop and the direct market community isn't, there's not tens of thousands of stores in the country. They're remarkably resilient. They're pretty consistent in their business. And the biggest stumbling block was we couldn't point to that particular community growing exponentially at that time. So it just became an idea that seemed impossible to execute. And when you combine it with the institutional challenges that we had just running Bonfire day to day, it was just, it was all too much too soon. So
I got you.
We
I was curious.
We were guilty of a lot of ambitious thinking that we were not able to properly execute due to not having the right amount of resources. But it's nice to see some of these ideas.
How dare you be ambitious?
I know. Sometimes it pays to be lazy. I hate to say.
You're not wrong about that. All right, so you step away from Bonfire, and happy to, if you want to give as much color to that as possible. But if from the public record, it looks like the next step for you is Geek Riot. Yeah.
I mean, look, it was I remained very collaborative with Bonfire for many years after that because Steve and Ed kept going. I mean, technically, Bonfire's still going. I think it's just Steve now, and he works on some projects, but. We formed Geek Riot Media to start bringing in some of that, or I formed Geek Riot Media, sort of like a companion company in the beginning, to bring in some relevancy for my former advertising clients. So we basically created like a little ad network out of comic publishers, and we started building a similar digital network out of their websites. And it was just basically skimming small dollars. But the more I spent time with Geek Riot Media and had those kinds of conversations, the more it opened up opportunities for me to contract with publishers and other websites and things like that to help them build sales infrastructure and help them sort of prepare for the realities of being an advertising vehicle. So I did a lot of consultative projects like that that were interesting. And again, like I approached it all as like, I'm learning something. I'm attacking this world from a different angle. This is good for me. And again, I wasn't making the kind of money that I was making in my corporate job, but it was sustainable enough that I just blindly kept moving forward and trying new things. So Geek Riot was really me slowly breaking away and kind of just going back to my roots of selling advertising and selling custom publishing and things like that. And it was lonely. It was 2 or 3 years where I was always looking for longer term consulting gigs that I could latch onto that kind of provided me a dynamic group of people to bounce off of, because I was really feeling the burn of being just a dude going out and selling on my own. It was like living in a bottle. And that's how I found my role with Long Beach Comic Con that I had for a while. Martha Donato, who runs that con, hired me to help her on a couple of fronts, and I just kind of kept leaning in more and more with her and took on more and more responsibility. And that was great for a while because it was a really great group of people. It was a fun project. There was a great show for a while, and it was nice. It was nice to develop that little family there. But the con business was also a very unstable business, and that show is still there without my participation, which I love and support. But I don't miss managing the con in the 2 years before the pandemic when, we were chock-a-block with conventions here in LA, almost every week. And there was always
Oh
something
yeah.
fighting for bandwidth, and just meeting that same sort of baseline of attendance and, exhibits and all of that just became absolutely exhausting. And then the pandemic came and everything shut down. And that was my palate cleanser opportunity to kind of reflect and go, what do I do next?
I can only imagine. Do you know what Martha's doing these days? I'm actually really curious. She was somebody who was such a dynamic figure in our industry for a while, and now
Yeah,
I
I think
don't know if she still runs
Martha's
Long
more
Beach, does she?
embraced the trade portion of events. So she's doing a lot of work
Mm,
with like event coalitions and things like that, trying to improve relationships and create solidarity and things like that. She's like working on events for events, if that makes sense. I haven't talked to her in quite a while, but
that
I
makes
always
sense.
see her travels on social media, and I'm always glad to see her out doing something.
Yeah,
I think she always had ambitions to do things beyond comics because she became so specifically known for comics after Wizard and Long Beach and all
yeah.
of that. And it's really nice to see her getting a taste of what she wanted.
Yeah, I think I saw something on LinkedIn yesterday, something like that, about her being involved with giving an award to the owner of the Javits.
Yep.
Like, that's some rubbing some shoulders there. Yeah, awesome. Well, all right. So talk about how, like, you're now going into, uh, you talked about how COVID really shifted. I know that there's a lot of stories for you. I mean, for many of us, right? We all kind of use that as an opportunity to step back and take stock. But I mean, that's a big, broad thing that you spent your time there. Also, looks like you did some gig for United Media, just I guess before then, like during the Geek Riot period. Like, talked about like how did those experiences kind of lead to where you're in a place where you're forming this company now that is so dynamic and strong.
Yeah, the last couple of years before the pandemic,
Can you?
we always went out as at this point I had onboarded a partner named Colin Millington, who's still with me today at Modern Fanatic. We've been working together now for a little under 10 years. He's an amazing human being who, like, I have a dynamic with him where we're always on the same page, almost wordlessly. Like, it's very rare to have that. You can just kind of look at somebody and know exactly what they're
Oh
thinking.
yeah,
Colin and I have a dynamic like that. Um, he and I were just slugging it out and, trying to yield any business that we could. And the opportunity was changing very drastically from folks looking to work with us to buy advertising to folks who were saying, like, I want to understand this audience. I want to understand people who go buy comics and go to comic shops and go to conventions and people who play games and understand, as an affinity marketer, how I could be speaking their language a little bit better. So we would find ourselves a lot of times like giving away these insights in the hopes of getting ad business, and it didn't always result in ad business. So right around the
yeah.
time, like the 6 months before the pandemic, we were having a lot of philosophical conversations about, like, well, do we want to keep doing this? Like, do we want to, abruptly sort of change our direction here? And we never pulled the trigger. Then the pandemic happened, and everything we were working on just came to a screeching halt. Like, it was like one day we had a couple projects in the air, and then the next day we had nothing. And we decided during that phase we were gonna just take the time to figure out how do we make this better, because there was the sort of the different perception of where our value was. Like, people were coming to us in more of a consultative way, looking for insights as opposed to buying something from us. And also, we were just working ourselves into a grave trying to just yield as much business as possible. So we decided we needed more of an agency focus, and we needed more bodies. We needed more people to be on this mission with us. So we onboarded some strategic partners. I went back to my Bionicle buddy, Michael Pratt, who at that point had exited Lego and was looking for his next move and was kind of burnt out from corporate work. And he came on board. And then somebody, Jeremy Atkins, also was kind of looking for looking to shake up his approach to his work. He'd been slugging it out as a like a freelance publicist in comics and music for a while, and I think he was getting tired of the grind. And we all decided to anchor our boats together and create this agency called Modern Fanatic. And it really did solve a lot of the problems that we were having. Suddenly there were a lot of different people with different skills that we didn't overlap very much. We actually complemented each other very well. So
Right.
Michael had more of a retail marketing background. Jeremy was a publicist. Colin was a media salesperson, and I was like a content salesperson, content marketing person. And we built up an agency from the ground up. We kind of had a very specific ethic in mind for this, is that we wanted to be in the strategy seat. The primary thing to us was helping brands figure out how to solve problems they were having marketing to different subsets of fandom. Because affinity marketing is big and getting bigger, and content marketing is big and getting bigger. And we figured, like, we're the ultimate solution there. We know how to create compelling content that delivers a marketing message, and we also know what works and what doesn't with these different groups of fans, right? So out of the gate, the idea worked. So we launched soft, and quite frankly, to this day, we never did as much as send out a press release about ourselves. So we launched basically by virtue of our own personal connections and Rolodexes, and just put out the feelers and said, hey, we're open for business. We're doing this. If you have a marketing challenge, let us know. Within about 2 weeks' time, we had a deal with the CW to work on a piece of the Superman and Lois launch business when they were launching that series a few years back. And we helped them with some very specific fan challenges, created some really cool video content for them. And that was it. We just never rested for a moment after that. So we never advertised. We never did any press about ourselves. And yet we've managed to work with really big brands like Bandai and Red Roof Inn. And, even now we're working with Rainbow Media, the animation company. And we're still working with comic book creators, comic book publishers, game publishers. It's a really diverse list. And we have a really amazing staff that, intuitively knows this world and these fandoms, but also they have genuine marketing skills. It's really gratifying to see how personal this mission is to all of them too, and how, even though this isn't their company, they don't own it, they're employees, they are so prideful of Modern Fanatic, and they give so much of themselves. And we just keep growing very organically. And now we're figuring out what our next big turn is. How do we want to tier up in a big way. We want to add more staff. We want to become more of a global agency. So these are the challenges heading into 2025 we're trying to wrap our heads around right now. And, we have no intention of slowing down or quitting. And we're all maniacs, and we love this stuff so much, and we're proud of our work. And just couldn't be happier about how Modern Fanatic has blossomed over these last 4 years.
What's the size of the company, like generally speaking? The partners that you just mentioned, right?
There's 4 partners in the business.
Is it just you guys?
Myself, Colin, Jeremy Atkins, and Michael Pratt. And then we have, I want to say, somewhere around 8-9 employees at this point. We started hiring overseas recently. One of our newest hires is in London, and that was a very strategic decision we made so that we could, have greater outreach in other territories, and that's been working really well. And then we have a board of advisors. We have about 7 people on that board, all really wonderful, talented people with different skills, and they've been incredibly additive, not just like pointing us towards potential business and directions, but really helping us with our current business load and providing great suggestions about how to manage the current workload and grow the workload, and providing insights to people we should be connecting to. It's just, it's all worked out much better than I could have expected. So I think between owners and employees, we're probably at about 12 or so at this point. I should really know that.
Cool. What, huh?
I should really know that.
You're not going to talk to all 12 people in the same day. There are probably some you don't almost never talk to, right? You got to work on so many different things.
Before this one, so.
Yeah. Oh, well, there you go then. I'm curious that you mentioned your board of advisors. I've heard of, I've been worked at companies that had boards of advisors. They tend to be much larger, and you and I both have small companies, small agencies. What led you to that? How does that, how do you put that together? How often do you speak to them?
Not as often as we'd like, and that's really says more about our current workload than anything else. We're trying to rethink how we
Mm-hmm.
connect with them more frequently and more meaningfully. But what we try to do is we try and share meaningful updates with them, get their perspectives individually. Sometimes we go to them when we're having very specific challenges that overlap into their world. And the thrust behind it really was like, I feel like one of my weaknesses is that, forgive the turn of phrase, but like I spend so much time breathing in my own air that I don't often have a proper perspective on reality. So sometimes I get caught up in the weeds in my own
Sure.
thinking, and I go like, am I approaching this the right way? Am I pitching it the right way? Am I thinking about it the right way? And to have a group of people who can just be a sounding board for us in a non-judgmental way and say, no, I think you should do this instead, or I worked on this back then and this is what happened. Like, if that's all they did, that would be a tremendous value to me personally. And they've done so much more than that.
Yeah.
But it was the right move for us. Now we've got to figure out how to be functional enough day to day that we can actually have more meaningful time with them. And we're making those strides now
Yeah.
to have more employees and things like that. So I think once we get past that next turn that we need to make, we're going to be making much better use of their participation and their minds. They're absolutely invaluable to me.
Yeah. I have no doubt. I hadn't actually considered it, but that you think about, I'm thinking maybe that's what I need. It'd be nice to have, because I know that especially those of us who have organizations that are scattered all over the map, like it's real tough. You can just spend all day at home, and
Yeah,
you can get wound up on the wrong thing. Yeah, it totally makes sense to have a crew that's not your team that you're paying. So yeah,
yep,
it makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
it does make a lot of
All
sense.
right.
And yet, honestly, it's such a relief. Like just to know that you've got like a small army that has your back. Like that's been the most valuable thing to me.
Yeah.
I don't feel rudderless when I'm up against a wall or painted into a corner. It's like there's always people I can call who will give me some better perspective.
Yeah, no kidding. No kidding. That's that's I really like that idea. All right. Uh so before we dive into your new passion project, before we dive into Panic, I'm hoping we could talk a little bit about your heavy metal experience,
Oh
because
yeah,
you
sure.
have been a publisher once before.
I have been, yeah.
And so how did that come together? Yeah, tell me about that experience, because I mean, looking at the dates, that was also something that happened for you over COVID. Which is remarkable,
Yeah.
you know?
So I got a call out of the blue from the then CEO of heavy metal who had got my number from a mutual friend. And it was one of those things where I was like, I don't know if this is a real call. Like I have to vet this number and everything. Because it was like a couple days before the holidays, December of 2020 or no, 2019. And I just get this call that says, "Hey, I'm the new CEO of heavy metal. I was told I need to talk to you and give me a call when you get a chance." It was just very casual. So wound up meeting with all the folks who were running heavy metal back then, and I came on board in February of 2020, just as like that Salesforce for hire thing. I was helping them build some ad infrastructure. And again, a couple hours a week, very low lift. And I was grateful for it because once the pandemic hit, that was the only ongoing retainer that I still had. So that was like a lifeline to me. So I
Yeah.
attended some meetings, I made some calls, but again, the ad business dried up. There was nothing I could do for them except help them maximize the website for advertising and optimize it and all of that. And then one day the CEO called me and he's like, "Hey, you've done marketing work and press work before. Do you know?" He goes, "Do you know how to write a press release?" I was like, "Yeah, of course I know how to write a press release." He's like, "Do you have a list of outlets you can send it out to too?" I'm like, "Yeah, I do." So I wrote one
I
press
have a
release for
press
them. I was
list.
like, you know what? I might as well make myself valuable while I'm here and keep this retainer. So I'll write this press release. And I did it, and then we got a bunch of hits, and everybody was happy. And then the CEO asked me, "He's like, you want to just keep doing this for us for the time being, since you're good at it?" So yeah, I was just trying to
Yeah.
make myself valuable and keep the relationship going in those early days. So I sort of became the publicist, and then that was fine. You know, it was still pretty low lift, and I had ample time to wrap my head around Modern Fanatic and do some other work where it popped up. Um, but that another case where I just kind of kept leaning in, and that role just snowballed. So I went from being a salesperson for hire to being the publicist to being offered the chief sales officer job, which I took. And then that led to me being associate publisher and then ultimately publisher. Um, it was a fascinating couple of years. Probably the most high stress position I've ever had. Um, and one of those things where it's like every day you peel that onion and there's more layers and more layers. Like the things that it's one of the downsides of a independently run company that's changed hands so many times is that you're kind of dragging legacy issues with you along, even whether you realize it or not. And these things just come out of the woodwork. So we would find out all the time about, things that were promised by the previous administration that didn't happen. And we would have to really sit down and figure out, like, how real is this? Do we need to see this through? So there were a lot of external factors that always kind of took focus away from things that we wanted to do. And the whole reason I leaned in on the associate publisher and publisher side is because everyone was just sort of thrust into problem solving all the time. And we needed somebody with a steady hand to just make sure books went to the printer and that, if ads were coming in, they were going in the right places. And I just sort of naturally stepped into that role. And then one day I said, I think I'm going to add associate publisher to my title. And they were kind of cool with it. But it was, I will say this, it was like it battle tested me in ways that no other job, comic or otherwise, did before and hopefully after. Like there were a lot of crazy crises that popped up every single day. There were a host of issues that we always had to deal with, but we did do some interesting work creatively in that time that I'm very proud of. We worked with some really interesting creators. I think our administration did more to try and re-engage with the remaining original talent that worked on the books in the early days and try and at least develop relationships with them. There were a lot of things that I look back and I still feel really good about. And quite frankly, almost everything that I'm doing with Panic was kind of informed by things I wanted to do at heavy metal and couldn't really get done, if that makes sense. But it was fascinating.
That totally makes sense. I think that's almost every job, right?
Yeah, I think so. But this is like really cause and effect. Yeah. Like it's so obvious. What was fascinating to me is learning the economics of making a magazine. That was very different to me, and it's wildly different than a comic book. And the distribution channel is a completely different beast. And trying to manage all these different points of distribution between our books that were going with one distributor, our magazine that was going with at least two distributors at any given time, and then the periodical comic business. It was a lot. So I was fortunate I found some good people there to hire who, came in at rates much lower than they should be working for because of our reality. But again, that was a total passion thing. Everyone just wanted to be part of the resurgence of heavy metal. I think this is why most of us were there, because it meant something to us. And again, I feel good about what I did there. There's some things I would do very differently. But again, I've sort of developed this mentality that you just articulated. It's like, my professional journey is like, that was supposed to work out the way it did because now I'm doing this. Like I try and process it like it's all part of a broader journey that kind of puts me where I am today.
Yeah, there's this belief, whether or not you believe in serendipity or the hand of God or whatever, this understanding of what can this teach me. And even if the world is just chaos, right? Even if the universe is just a swirling whirl of dice being thrown, that approach means that you are looking for the lessons, you're looking for growth. And I think that it sounds like exactly what you've taken from that, which is wonderful.
I mean, the lessons were there for the taking
So,
every day. Just put it
I've
that
had
way.
that gig.
Yeah.
I've had a very similar experience to that, where everything is on fire all the time. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But, I want to talk a little bit now that we dealt with. I want to come back to publishing, but before we come back to publishing, I'd like to come back to marketing.
Yeah.
I've done a lot of reading about and thinking about marketing, as a capital M marketing, as I have joked before on the show. How do you think of that word? What is marketing? When Kris Longo writes his "This Is Marketing" book, like, what is the definition for you?
I think the definition, look, in its basis terms, it's somebody trying to sell you something, right? Like that's the end game here. If it's a soft sell or a hard sell, it's something with a call to action, and you as a consumer are supposed to respond. But the way I process it these days is that when you look at Gen Z in particular, like they don't by and large, they've created sort of an ecosystem for themselves where traditional advertising doesn't really get the opportunity to seep into their heads. And I say this having a 17-year-old in my home, and oftentimes, whether she knows it or not, I'm kind of bouncing concepts off of her without telling her I'm doing so. But they're savvy enough to understand I can block this stuff out to a certain extent. I can pay a premium upcharge to not have my streaming service send me ads, or I can do that. So to them, the marketing that does reach them doesn't necessarily feel like marketing. It's something a little bit more subtle. And the most obvious thing is like influencer plays, right? Like that's something that they're used to. And I think by and large, they don't necessarily process as marketing, even though it very much is. So marketing to me, I think at the end of the day is about telling a story. And I think that's the through line in my career, is that I'm just sort of wildly obsessed with storytelling, be it the story of a brand, the story of a product, or a comic book story or a horror story. So you got to tell the best possible story that you can. And we just try and be, as Modern Fanatic, we just try and be stewards of really good storytelling in everything that we do. So we're always, as an agency, one of our big ethics is always about content. We are always trying to encourage brands to use content, because content is kind of the way to get things done nowadays. If you do it right, the subject does not feel like they're being marketed to in any way. And you can do it in a subtle way that doesn't seem like somebody is shilling or is desperate or is, kind of encroaching into your personal space. So that's the one word I would say. I would define it as storytelling.
That's a really wonderful point of view. I was just telling someone that I felt like one of the reasons that, custom comics, or even comics in general, one of the reasons they work so well is that everyone is fighting for advertising dollars now. And the advertising dollar can be much better spent creating intellectual property. And then you own something, right? It's an asset. Right. I love that. I love that point of view. That's really wonderful. What would you say is more fulfilling to you these days? And if you had to pick, I don't know. I don't want to make you pick from the two things that actually feed you, but yeah, I'm going to make you anyway. Talk about the different roles you say they're basically both storytelling, but as publisher and as marketer.
Yeah. I
mean, how do those two feed you differently?
It's funny, until somebody like you points it out, I kind of don't think about it very much, but I do sort of treat Modern Fanatic like my 9 to 5. So when I'm sitting here in my office Monday through Friday and it's 9 to 5, my primary focus is usually on Modern Fanatic and our clients, and I try and keep my focus very split, because having done multiple projects at once before, I know how my brain works, and I kind of spread myself too thin and everything suffers as a result. But with this, I made it a point to separate my day parts here to an extent. So aside of like an odd meeting here or there, or keeping up sort of our WhatsApp with the PANICK team, like I think with the good news about it too is like the PANICK team is so far flung. One of our partners is in Ireland. We are we're all over the place. So we all have this like we work when we work mentality. So there's no hours, so I find
Yeah.
myself shifting into panic mode, no pun intended, usually by about 5 or 6 o'clock at
Heyo.
night, and, working until I drop. But that doesn't, it's funny. Modern Fanatic certainly is a job, and it feels like a job because I'm hired by clients and they have expectations and they have needs, and I take that very seriously. And I also take very seriously the health of the company and making sure that the people working for us are always going to be paid and we never have to have any problems. We don't have to lay people off. And like, that's the stuff that I think about when I'm thinking about Modern Fanatic. I'm very much in a mode of running a business. And with Panic, the pressure's not on us yet. Our things are still far in the future. So Panic is like world building to me. I'm trying to figure out who we're going to be when we're in the marketplace and where we want our content to be and what kind of partners we want to have, and thinking about artists that I've always wanted to work with or writers that I've always wanted to work with. And that is just it is just so goddamn fun. It's a pure indulgence for me to do this stuff. It really is. So as of now, I process that as work because it's just so unbelievably fun and fulfilling. But of course, at some point, it's gonna be a job, right? It's gonna be something where I've got those responsibilities and there's eyes on us and things like that. But I don't know. I just feel so good about the content that we're making, and it's just as strong as I was hoping and more. And I'm really just anxious to get there and share this stuff with everybody. But yeah, I guess I still treat Panic as like my reward for a hard day of work. Although we do work really hard on that stuff, it just doesn't hit my brain as work because it's just so much fun.
It's still play.
Yeah,
I feel that. Yeah, I definitely feel that. And as soon as it becomes work, you're just going to have to find something else to build to play.
Oh,
so
geez, please, no more.
and
I got
increasing
nothing
the
left.
cycle.
This is it. This is my swan song, my friend. If this doesn't work out, I'll just be happy to be the marketing guy.
I feel that so deeply.
I'm 50 years old.
So
I don't have
deeply,
another startup in me.
Yeah. You and I are in the There's so much overlayer here. I totally feel you. Well, that's well. So, is there more about Panic? So, tell me more about how that relationship kind of came together, and this team? How's this team coalesce?
Yeah, so when I left heavy metal, I was always the guy in the room pushing to do more horror stuff. Like I really wanted to lean into heavy metal being like this counterculture kind of brand, which was always at odds with and again, I begrudge nobody trying to make this thing a huge success, but it was always at odds with the folks who wanted to make games and movies and TV shows and do capital B brand work with heavy metal. The ideas that I liked were way more challenging, and I think were made, probably sensibility speaking, more of a piece with the early days of heavy metal. And there was a concerted effort over the last few administrations to kind of make the content a little bit more palatable to mainstream audiences, but still retaining a little bit of an edge. And I don't know. I liked a lot of the stories that we told there, and I think we took some really interesting chances. But I always felt like the horror of it all didn't really have an appropriate moment to shine. So there were a couple of projects I had in my head, like ideas that I developed, and then ideas I was working on, trying to push through with other creators near the end. That just weren't. It was a losing battle. It just wasn't going to resonate, and decisions were made by committee, and everyone's got to be on the same page, so on and so forth. But when I did make the decision to leave heavy metal, I felt like, well, I've got all of this content, I've got this opportunity, I've got these things that didn't work for heavy metal. I should probably be doing something with them. So I started tinkering with this idea. The first phone call I made was to a guy named Mark McCann. Mark was a comic book writer that I had the pleasure of working with at Heavy Metal. He created an amazing book. It's out there in a trade collected edition called Never Never. Highly encourage anybody listening to this to check out that book. It's a really sort of rough and tumble take on Peter Pan mythology. Really cool book. Looks great. Mark was just somebody that had the same interests, sensibilities. I found I would talk to Mark about business for 5 minutes and then about all the stuff we were reading and loved and movies we saw for another 55 minutes every time we had a call. So I reached out to Mark and told him about this idea. And I was like, I kind of feel like you need to be our chief creative officer. And I could tell, he was a little taken aback by that and wasn't expecting it. But to my delight, he was completely on board with the mission. And then one by one, I would go out into the world and start telling people I trusted about my plans for Panic. Another one being Adam Schlagman, who was not only an editor at DC, but he was the VP of film at DC for many years and was an executive producer on the Shazam movies and The Kitchen and a bunch of other DC projects that came out during his time. Adam had just been crunched out by DC, unfortunately, and wanted to get back into writing comic books and creating stuff for himself and just sitting in that seat for a while. And when I approached Adam about this, his impulse was to pitch me a book, which he did with his writing partner, Doug Pascoe. And it was a really great concept that became our book, Tama. And in the process of getting that book kind of where we needed it to be and, helping Adam and Doug work through some challenges that they were having with it, it just became apparent to me, like, these guys, I like being around these guys. This makes sense. Adam and I had a relationship from our time at DC. So he was a very, easy person to be around for me and always a treat to be around. Doug became very apparent. He, again, shared sensibilities. I always kind of liken it to, like, if I can't sit on a plane next to somebody for 6 hours, I can't run a business with them either. And I was thinking about it critically, and I'm like, I could go cross country or international with these guys. That'd be fun. That wouldn't be a chore. So pretty low bar, but that's kind of my entry level thinking about onboarding partners. But again, I brought it up. I was like, you guys should be involved in this business. You're both looking for your next move, and this seems right. And again, they were just like, yep, we're in. So did that with our finance guy, Chris Chang, who was also somebody I knew from DC. And now we've got a really strong team, and everyone is just so committed to this. And, what I love about this is Mark in particular, one of his gifts, he's a great writer, but he's also a great nurturer. So I have never seen him dismiss a pitch out of hand. Even if he turns down a pitch, he gives suggestions for how to make the pitch stronger and will encourage the person to, like, come back to us. If you take this stuff to heart and you want to talk about it again, come back when you've taken another pass. He is always trying to help people be better. It's just the way he is. And, I would say he is the one person who's responsible for making everything even better than it could have been the way it was coming in. So just stuff like that is just so incredibly rewarding. So I'm still in this honeymoon phase with Panic. Everything is just a blast and fun, and it's just so exciting to me. But these books are marvelous, and I literally cannot wait to send you copies and just hear what you have to say.
I can't wait either. I'm really looking forward to that. I mean, that is the thing that is so infectious about this business, right? Is that once once everybody has really just put their soul into something, and it takes a team of people that are just, like, really impassioned to try and make this as good as it possibly can be. And once that happens, like, it becomes this sort of magical totem that I think the reason that we love physical comics so much is that some of that energy just transfers to you when you're holding it. Like, it's just, sorry, that's real woo woo, but it's hard for me to not believe it.
You're so right. Yeah. You're so right. And it definitely comes down to the company you keep too. Like, it is, the older I get, the more we joke that like many companies, we try and maintain a stringent no assholes policy. But while that's something to say to get a chuckle out of people, it really is the truth. Like, I don't care how talented somebody is. If they're just going to be disruptive and rock the boat and take us away from our focus and our mission, like, then you're not really contributing anything. I don't care how brilliant you are. And I don't think, looking at everyone who's kind of in the extended Panic family right now, even folks who are working on books that we haven't announced yet that are coming out later in 2025 and 2026, everyone's just so down with this mission and so amazing to work with and so pleasant, so happy to be here. This can't possibly last in this, like, floating on a cloud kind of way of running this business. But man, I'm enjoying every second of this because it's just, it's just a delight to open up the Panic inbox and see what's been delivered, and pour over that stuff with the guys. And I don't know, just I sound like a fool, but I'm having just such a wonderful time making all this happen.
I'm letting you and grinning like a fool, because I know I can just feel it coming off of you. And I can tell you that as someone who is just, not, yeah, you get to 50 and suddenly it's like, I'd rather be broke. I'd rather be broke than have to spend that much time with an asshole. Yeah, absolutely.
100%. No, I couldn't go back. I couldn't go back to corporate work. Like, this is who I am now. And for better or worse, no. But I'm much happier. I have
a potential client. I went to their office this week, and as much as I love them and the work they're doing and the people who brought me in and people I'll be working with, I had to walk through this gauntlet of like people sitting at desks, like 40 people, like just kind of, I just felt like my soul was just eking out of my body as I walked past. It was not good.
The air in the room is heavy, right?
Yeah. Oh, anyway. Well, that's incredible. That's wonderful. I feel like, the thing is I'm finding is when I talk to people who are storytellers like yourself, I will come with the same list of questions, like the same number of questions as I will someone who doesn't spend their time storytelling. And the reason that we usually budget out 2 hours for these questions is because sometimes you have to draw it out, and there's much, somebody will say something and we're like, oh, let's dig into that, instead of they have refined the point. I realize I'm taking a long-winded way of saying you are like very succinct, and I'm running out of stuff to ask you because you're so succinct. I'm impressed. I got to give it up to the player.
Being succinct before. That's a new one for me. Never been told I've been succinct. Oh my
God. I'm actually looking at my notes and realizing something. I did miss something. So you, Modern Fanatic, right? You guys work with a lot of different brands. You've mentioned several different fandoms. Talk for a minute about how you stay connected, because you are running 2 businesses, right? Your story, and many of them are really high touch, the stuff that you're doing. You mentioned you have a family, you have a teenager at home. As someone who really who loves this world and the world of entertainment and the world of fandoms and comics, I really genuinely struggle to stay even partially connected to what is in the zeitgeist, what people are talking about. Talk about habits. Like, how do you, routine wise, how do you think about your day, and how do you continually stay connected? Because you for the work you're doing, really genuinely have to stay connected to those individual pieces.
Yeah, it's not easy. I mean, one of the things we look for when we hire people, obviously we want like a baseline of marketing skills and some demonstrated success in history. But we're really interested in people who come from or identify with a particular subset of fandom. So to that extent, we've got people who are voracious comic readers and tabletop gamers on our staff. We've got a really interesting cross section of fandom, to the point where when we started doing some work with Bandai on their Gundam tour this year through the agency, I knew for a fact in our first meeting about that we had 2 people on staff who are Gundam obsessed. So I know surface level, at the time, I knew surface level stuff about the Gundam community. Like, I had an inkling of who they were. But to be able to sit down with one of my staffers and just say, tell me everything, tell me all about this fandom. And then they're happy to do it, and they have all the right answers. So a lot of it is making sure that, we're hiring people who are also kind of like avatars for those different fandoms, because that perspective is really important. And we've been fortunate in finding people, who are, participants in these fandoms when they're not working. So that's part of it. And the other is just sort of acknowledging that I am out of the demo for just about everything at this point, and I have to make an effort. So I do spend a lot of time, like my free time, whatever that looks like, is spent, reading different websites, trades. I try to read Reddits about different topics. At night, my wife and I are trying to unwind, sit on the couch. I'm usually on my phone in some sort of a subreddit about, a particular fandom, just kind of lurking and hearing what people have to say. So it does require a lot of effort.
Yeah.
But the older I get and the more naturally out of touch you get becoming an older person, I do rely on our younger team more and more to be able to provide those, insights that are not assumptions, coming from people who would actually buy the product if they weren't working on a campaign for the product. So that's a big part of it.
Right.
But you have to make the time. You have to make the time. Fortunately, comics are, kind of an obsession for me, so I never really have to work too hard to be an expert in that. And I love horror movies and things like that. So my own fandoms, I'm always kind of, usually on top of things. But for gaming and things like that, where I just don't have the personal bandwidth to dive in the way I might want to, it's just really valuable to have that expert perspective from a super fan.
Yeah. It's funny. I'm imagining the me that was obsessively sending emails to Steve Rotterdam during that period, and the you that was had that gig, and I'm just imagining us hearing these old men going, "Yeah, we gotta dive deep into Gundam. That's what we're getting paid for these days." Yeah. What are your you mentioned you're still. I know. Well, listen, man, we're both in our 50s. At 20, we would have looked like, crazy old dudes. What you said comics are still a big one for you. What are your favorites? What are you picking up? Where do you shop, by the way? Do you have an LCS?
Oh, yeah. There's a couple stores here in LA I go to. When I've got some time, I like to go to Golden Apple. Ryan's a friend. I love him and his family. They're great. I do go to, there's a couple shops here in Burbank that are small, but they usually don't have, if you go in on a Thursday, that's kind of the test for me with a comic shop. If you're completely depleted of your new release comics by Thursday, I kind of gravitate more towards the stores who go a little bit deeper. So Collector's Paradise is a great store in NoHo, really close to my home, and they're really lovely people. But I just try and go in there as often as I can, and I try and browse and pick up things, and I respond to covers a lot these days. I tend to just take a chance on a book if I like what I see on the cover without knowing anything about it. But I tend to gravitate towards horror books, sci-fi books, things like that more than anything else. I'm not really reading too much superhero stuff these days, and I'll be honest that I kind of fell out of the Spider-Man of it all a few years back. But I tend to do that, and I tend to always be about 4 months behind everybody else in terms of what I'm reading. So to give you an example,
that sounds right.
I just read Ram V's Creature from the Black Lagoon first issue last weekend, and I really like that.
Oh, yeah. I've not read that, but I do like his work. Yeah, I do want to double tap on that, what you just said. For all the retailers who are listening to this, because there's a big part of our audience is comic book retailers, I want you to hear what he just said. If you're sold out on Thursday, he would have walked in and walked right back out. I'm not saying you should over-order. I'm just saying maybe some for the shelf. That's okay. There you go. That's my infomercial over.
But also, I try to never leave a comic shop without purchasing something, even if it wasn't what I came in for.
Oh, me too. Yeah. One of my favorite things to do, and I do genuinely love it, I've talked about it, I think, on here, is I love going in and just asking the staff what's good, because I love hearing them pitch.
Yeah.
Almost, I'll buy it and probably never read it, but I just want to hear you pitch it. That's it's my favorite thing. And occasionally those are the people that I'm like, when it's time to hire again, we go looking at those teams. This has been wonderful, Kris. You and I have kind of peripherally known each other for a very long time, and it's good to actually have this opportunity to kind of get to know you. What is there anything else that we didn't cover? Anything in particular you want to make sure? Well, this audience, we're well over an hour in now, so it's the audience is not exactly huge, I'll be honest. But for the six people, including Ed Greenberg, who you gave a shout out to, who are watching this, yeah.
I just want
is there anything we missed?
First thing I want to say is I just want to thank all the people who've supported our Zoop fundraiser to date. We're really encouraged by the turnout that we've had so far. we feel confident about hitting that goal and maybe going even a little above it. I just want to make sure that everyone who's thinking about it or everyone who's listening to this knows that, this couldn't be more of a passion project for all of us who are doing this. We love horror so much. And the 3 books that we've taken on as our launch slate that are represented here, we really feel like we're telling 3 very distinct kinds of horror stories. And it's a great sort of representation of where we want to go in the future with Panic. So all I'm going to say is, if you do choose to support us, I thank you, and we'll absolutely make sure it's worth your while. And these books are going to be good for you.
I have no doubt. I bet they're gonna be very nutritious. You're gonna feel full and satisfied and healthier than when you went in.
And hopefully a little shaken.
Wonderful.
A little chin.
Yeah, a little bit, maybe a little rattled, a little seeing the world with slightly different eyes, like that moment after you eat a chili pepper that was probably hotter than you wanted it to be, and suddenly you just sense everything. That's a good horror should feel like, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Where can folks find your musings, your product, your favorite baseball team?
If me personally, you can find me on whatever the last vestiges of Twitter are at Kris Longo, at Kris Longo, my first name, my last name. If you want to find me on Instagram, I'm Kris_Longo for some reason, because somebody beat me to the punch on Instagram. And if you want to check out what Panic has to offer, we are at, on most places, at time_2.panic with a K on the end of it. And you can get us at timetopanic.com. That leads you right to our Zoop landing page. And you can see, in most cases of these 3 books, somewhere in the ballpark of like 6 to 10 pages of artwork in progress and amazing Shane Pierce covers and all we have to offer. So please check it out. And if you want to hit me on social media and tell me it looks cool or you think you could have done better, I'm open and available and happy to hear it.
It's that last one. That's the generosity. That was the generous moment, was you said, please tell me you could have done better. Awesome. Thank you so much, Kris. It has been a genuine pleasure. Hi again. Thanks so much for watching Comic Industry Insiders. It, as always, is our pleasure to talk to the movers and shakers of comics and to bring you those conversations. We'd love it if you'd support us with a like and subscribe, and telling your friends is always good, but really what we'd want to do is hear from you. Any questions, any suggestions you have about our show, any suggested guests, frankly, anything at all, we'd love to hear from you. Our producer is nearly always Stephanie Gerk, and our researcher is Anthony Militano, who makes me look much smarter than I am. All right, guys. Thanks so much. Namaste, y'all.